So on to the next session. This is talking about the trends in the future of events. So I'd like to welcome Chad Blaise, Chief Revenue Officer at Stover. He's going to be chairing the session. Miguel Neves, Editor-in-Chief at Skift Meetings, and then also Reese Morgan, Head of Digital Technology Mayor at JP Morgan. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see standing room only attendance. Thank you so much. For me, I think I want to start with a very quick run of show, just so you understand the lay of the land over the next 45 minutes. We're going to start with just a couple questions, focus on the now. I think everyone's experiencing that today, but just to get a couple fresh perspectives from these gentlemen to my left. Then we'll dive into some future questions that we're hearing a lot from our customers, our prospects, the industry in general, and hearing a fresh perspective both from Reese, who's coming at it from a customer standpoint, and Miguel, who's coming at it from an industry standpoint. And then we're going to leave 15 minutes for questions. So please, as we're discussing things today, fill the queue with the questions that we'll save to the end and make sure that we field some of those questions that you have in mind. So with that, I want to dive in. 45 minutes is going to go by with a blink of the eye. My first question to you, Reese, is in a couple sentences, describe what you feel the events industry is today, and secondarily, what's the thing today that's keeping you up at night?
Sure, thanks, Chad. So I think what we're starting to see within events is definitely a rebalance in terms of the equilibrium between virtual and in-person. That's clear. At JP Morgan, we really do value, it's all about the relationship we have with clients. So in-person has really come back for us in a big way. We've almost doubled down on the in-person kind of direction of travel, and that's really come forth from our chief executive and chairman, which is Jamie Dimon. It's all about in person. So we are at kind of pre-pandemic levels in terms of the in-person experience. I still think virtual events still have a massive part to play, and whilst obviously the number that we're running on a regular basis has dropped, we are still looking at 20% uptick from where we were pre-COVID levels. So virtual isn't going away. We can talk somewhat about hybrid and where that sits, particularly for JP Morgan, but certainly no, for us it's the ship has steadied a great deal, and we're really excited in terms of where both our in-person and virtual events will go, and particularly for me in terms of the technology as well and how we can make them even more engaging and more immersive.
Great, and so for that second question, what worries you today?
What worries me today, I mean, we've done a lot of things over the last 2 years. I mean, consolidation was a big piece for us. I mean, there's a lot of players out there, a lot of the ecosystem to kind of traverse through. There's a lot of technology and trying to understand how this pieces together. So a big thing we did 2-3 years ago within our events experience space is consolidation and making sure our event planners, our marketers can really skill up on that platform and that we have a platform to scale. Something that is always a challenge, and I'm not sure it keeps them up at night, but it's definitely a challenge to manage. Is how do you cater from the small niche, high touch events right up to the large scale hybrid or in-person experience, and keep the level of personalization, keep the level of high touch points with them. So I think that's certainly for a challenge for us. And the other piece is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this too, is about data. So how do we leverage data to provide insights to make sure we're getting the right ROI and that we know how to engage our clients in the future?
Super helpful. Miguel, over to you.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, the first question is, when you think about the state of the event industry today, a couple sentences, and then the second question we'll get to, which is really what keeps you up at night.
Cool. So Skift Meetings, we write about this all the time. I think the right now is a really interesting time. We had this big virtual bubble, I think is probably safe to call it, over the last couple of years, where everybody had to go online. The planners tend to panic a little bit, and we're quite scared of it. Everybody figured it out, but I think we also tried to compare a little bit, a lot, in person and virtual, and I think we've realized that they're different things, and it's okay that they're different things, and they have different qualities, and they're good for different kind of events and different objectives. So I think we're at a super interesting point because nobody really knows. It looks like the event planning, the event industry is sort of happy to be back in many ways. I think a lot of people are also trying to push of what that back is, what it means, and can we do better? And if we do the same thing that we were doing 3 years ago, is that okay? I think a lot of people are just happy that they can, which is great, and I'm happy that we can meet face to face. But I think everybody's also asking those questions of how do we do it better? Like, what does better look like, and what role does technology play in all of that? And you know, we're writing a lot about attendance at events. We saw, you know, the numbers were promising at the end of last year, but we were kind of saying, is this enough? We were like at about 65%. I think most shows are now at sort of 80, 90%, which is pretty good. But we don't know if that is just compression. Like, we haven't had a show for a long time. So some associations are running 2 annual events this year because they didn't run one last year. It's like, that's great, but is that sustainable? Can we actually just keep doing that? And I think some associations go, yeah, we're just going to do two events a year now. And I don't, like, personally, I don't feel like that's realistic. So we're really trying to figure out what that really means and how do we take that forward? How do we do better? And how do we make it sustainable ultimately? Not from the ecology perspective, but from the whole business, like smart business, what's realistic? What can we do ongoing from here on?
And with that last comment, is that what keeps you up at night as you think about, you know, what's next for Skiff events and the things you're writing about?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, you know, we got used to being at home. You know, I think most people are seeing the hybrid workforce. A lot of people are working remotely. Just in the audience, who's in the office 5 days a week? Raise your hand. Right, there's 4 people, I think, out of everybody that's listening. So I think most people are embracing this kind of hybrid workforce. And I think that has a massive impact on events. Are we going to run more events because we need to, you know, feel a sense of community and company culture? A lot of people think yes. I'd like to see that. I haven't really seen that data yet, but I'd like to see it. And also, you know, I have 2 small kids. I live in Denmark. It was actually kind of tough to get on a plane and get here. My wife is not very happy with me right now. And I think a lot of people, whether they're married, have kids, or whether they just have a really nice family life and they've moved outside of central London, I think it's harder to get people to go to events in central London now or in any major city. And how does that impact our jobs? You know, do we need to make them better, or is that just how it is? That's really what's keeping me up at night.
Yeah, I think everyone's feeling that. Speaking of polling, if I could have some hands, who here attributes themselves as an event planner? Okay. Who here attributes themselves as a marketer? Interesting.
So some people put their hands up both times there.
Yeah, I saw that. So, and still, there was only a few that associated themselves as marketers. You know, maybe that will lead to some additional questions and comments later on. But the next question in the queue for me is, both of you had alluded to changes in virtual. There's been a lot of questions we've been gathering along the way of what does virtual look like in the future? And maybe I'll start with you this time, Miguel. You know, what is the future of virtual?
Well, this might sound like a cop-out, but I think the future of virtual is probably, in most cases, webinars. And I know most people are going to go, webinars, oh, that's so boring, we hate them. But I just feel like a really good webinar is really useful. Like a really hard-hitting, like hour or 45 minutes of great content, well-prepared speakers, good interviews, you know, data capture, there's some interaction. They can be great. And I don't think there's any like shame in that. And I think the more we embrace that, the more we can create, you know, hybrid strategies where we have webinars, we have in-person events. We might have some big virtual events, and there's a place for those. But I feel like those are sort of becoming more like television. Like if you're going to go really big virtual event, then it's like the Eurovision or watching the Olympics or whatever it is. It's like, let's go really cool. And then that's about creating a great TV show. And yes, there might be, an in-person audience and that whole hybrid thing. But I think like we were sort of trying to figure all that out. And we figured out information is delivered very well virtually. So if you're just in it for the content, virtual just works really well. Big splashy hybrid events or virtual events are sort of, the big presentations. Like Apple have been doing their product launches for years, essentially as a virtual event, and millions of people tune in, and some people go there in person, or I don't know if they still do. And then, and then there's webinars, and I think webinars are awesome. I have no issue with webinars. I just think people should just embrace them and make them great.
You may be the first person in the history of ever that said webinars are awesome, but love it. Great feedback. Reese, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think webinars are, like I said before, here to stay. We are being more selective about the frequency that we're doing. We're definitely seeing some fatigue. You know, we would see during COVID 70+% of registrants actually attending, down to somewhere between 20 and 50% on average now. So we do need to be more selective. It's important you've got a platform that can grow with your business. It's important you have a platform that's, from a technology standpoint, again, can integrate with your MarTech stack, and that allows you to leverage the data, the insight. It also allows you to have integrations with your CRM platform. It allows you to potentially use your own marketing automation platform. So integration is absolutely key in terms of getting the most out of your MarTech ecosystem so you can benefit planners and use those future insights. I think what we also have found through COVID as well, with your question about event planners versus marketeers there, is that the role is somewhat blurred now. I think event planners pre-COVID would really be much less more involved in terms of the technology platforms involved, and have really had to pivot and sometimes uncomfortably, but to pivot and understand how these platforms can be utilized and benefit the business. And what I see at JP Morgan is our event planners and marketeers now are much more capable, have a skill set to run these. We do a lot more self-service for virtual, and where we might have more marquee higher production events, what we've done is we've actually been able to leverage the existing relationships we have with some of the production agencies who also pivoted, and leverage them to kind of plug into our event management platform.
We had talked a little bit about the idea of kind of the evolution of the event program in general. One of the things that keeps popping up is it feels like we're almost back, and then lo and behold, here comes this thing called the recession. So just to address the elephant in the room, I'd love to hear, I'll start with you this time, Reese. What do you see as the impact of the potential pending global recession? There's been history over the years of the event industry being affected in certain ways. What's your take this time around?
For JP Morgan, events are considered core. It's a unique offering in terms of marketing. You can't get that from any of your other distribution marketing channels. So for us, actually what we're seeing in terms of our budget, we are looking good for next year in terms of like for like year on year. So that said, the impact of recession for us will be there'll be much more focus on cost efficiencies, making sure we're doing as much automation as possible, not having event planners going through manual processes, and also focusing on what's the ROI on the events that we're running. Does it make sense to run this conference, this webinar? Are we going to get the value for money and the leads off the back of it? So I think events is going to continue to be strong despite the economic climate we're in. It's just for us there'll be a focus on the value for money that we're getting out of it.
Makes complete sense. Miguel, you seen anything different?
Yes, I do. Well, I don't see it yet. I just predict that it's going to be a bit more challenging than I think we're hoping. We're seeing a lot of layoffs in big tech companies, a lot of layoffs within this space, and it's not a good sign. And kind of go back to my webinars are awesome kind of comment, because I feel like we're probably going to have to go back to running some great webinars in a lot of situations, because things are not looking rosy. Big investments in events. I am seeing that a lot of companies, hopefully this is something that they've learned from COVID, is that they're attributing some really high value kind of contracts, and really, face-to-face, in-person networking gets those deals done. I think people are really recognizing that, I think more than before. And I think also because they have that comparison to online, and they're saying, hey, when we actually do an in-person event, that's when we're shaking hands, and that's when we're making those deals. So I think they're valuing that more. But I think ultimately, if the budget is cut in half, events are going to go. And I think we have to be honest about that. And I think the more prepared we are, the better. I think it's great that we're able to meet face-to-face, and these shows are going on, and we're happy to be doing events again. And it's been a crazy fall. But I do feel there's a little bit of, I'm so busy, I don't want to think about next year. And actually, when you really look at what's coming up next year, not a lot of companies have committed large budgets to in-person events next year yet. So it's like, let's be realistic about this, folks. Let's prepare for having those virtual options and figuring out other ways of doing things.
I mean, based upon the show of hands, there's a lot of event planners in the audience. So I'll start with you with this question, which is, okay, let's acknowledge what's coming. What are some of the tools you can think of that helps them maybe better negotiate, navigate some of those pressures that are going to come from the recession over the course of the next 12 months?
I think anything you can look back to when COVID started and we had to go online and like really what we learned from that experience. I think anything you can do, and I think this comes to data. You know, this comes to like showing data. Hey, this is what we do. This is what happens. This is the impact that this has. I have to admit, I don't know if we've learned all our lessons as an industry. I think we talk a lot about data, but actually collecting data is really hard, and making those points and figuring stuff out is really hard. But the more we can do that, and we can prove that there is real value in organizing these events, then I think we're preparing ourselves for having those tough conversations. You know, and the event industry in general is always saying, hey, we need a seat at the table. We need a seat at the, the big C-level table. We need to be there. But if we're there, we need to talk the language that the C-level talk. And that language is, hey, we put on this in-person event, it did this, and we got these results. And if you show that, they're not going to cut the budget, because that's how they're going to make the revenue. But if you're saying, hey, it's great, we like seeing our friends, and it's really nice doing these things, they're going to say, well, that's nice, but nice doesn't pay the bills, and it gets slashed. So I think it comes down to lessons learned, and speaking that language is so important. And it's not about getting the C-level to speak the language of events. I'm sorry, but it's the event people have to speak the language of the C-level. It's that way around.
Check.
And the piece around the analytics does get particularly complex because events is just one digital touch point. So when you're looking at ROI and your leads, you need to make sure you've got an analytics platform and the BI and the insights to look at all those digital touch points, be it web, email, social channels, and piecing that all together. So I think it's important that you've got... I'm not going to wrap. Yeah, so I think it's important you've got the integrations in place to piece that information together, having the right BI analytics and machine learning and AI in place to have those insights and the feedback on that.
Check. We're going to keep passing around. So you've clearly had some success if you're having like-on-like spend. Is there anything specific that you can point to that says, hey, that gave me... Is it exactly that, the data? Or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to data. We've spent, at JP Morgan, we've spent probably the last 3 or 4 years completely revolutionizing our MarTech stack. So data and data-driven insights has to drive all of our business decisions. So it's not good enough that we have just a great client experience. We have to demonstrate the value that's coming from that to our business stakeholders. So I think having those integrations in place and having the right partner on the event side who can build those integrations, because at any one time, we may decide to change one part of our MarTech stack. So it's important you have that flexibility kind of built in.
I'll try this. This works.
Does this one work too? Check. No. All right, we'll stick with this. So, Reese, you had mentioned one of the things you focused on over the last couple years was consolidation. We've heard a lot of that in this industry. There's companies coming together. I happen to have the pleasure of working for a company that consolidated a handful of companies myself. That's part of the consolidation conversation. There's also consolidation as it relates to spend and vendor engagement and all that kind of stuff. So, anything you can share on your take of what's coming, what you're seeing from your side, et cetera?
Yes, I think pre-COVID we had 3 different virtual event webcast platforms. And that was really a challenge for us to have consistency across the client experience. It was challenging from a marketer's perspective in terms of building up the right skill sets. So one of the things when we were looking to reinvent our events experience is really running a really in-depth RFP, looking at kind of the capability matrix of all the virtual event platforms that are out there, and making sure we've got a platform that can scale to our needs, can provide the right immersive client and engaging experiences. And again, has the integration points that we need. And a big part of what we want is not just the client experience. It's actually how can this benefit the event planners. So one of our measures, our OKRs, is really around what is the time saved by bringing these platforms into house.
Yeah. So I think you obviously merged 3 companies that had their USPs, they had their kind of strong points. And I think the ideal situation is when you have an all-in-one solution, so the data moves seamlessly through all the different kind of things that you do. But then I'm always a big fan of individual companies that are very good at doing one thing really well, right? And so there's usually this kind of battle of, do you want the all-in-one that does, most things pretty well, but are not really excellent at any one thing, or do you want the, that's very specific, but then you have to do these integrations, and those are hard to do well a lot of times. I think when you get mergers, you can, at least for a moment in time, have the best of both worlds. Have these companies that are really specialist, really good, and bring it together. So I'll kind of drop a challenge to you in a way, like, don't mess this up. You've got some really good stuff going on here, and you're integrating everything, and that's a really good thing, and I think a lot of clients will like that. But there's a history of, mergers and then things getting a little bit diluted, and I just hope you don't go there, because that's what history's shown us, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and there is still elements of our event platform where we do bring specialization in. So I would say, for example, on the translation side, on some of the high production, higher event side, we'll bring in specialists for that. And again, a key part as an MVP for an event platform that you're bringing in is that it has that ability to integrate very quickly and flexibly. You don't want to be building bespoke integrations for every client, every vendor you're bringing in as a platform. So that's a key part of the selection process for us.
And since Miguel and I are friends and he put me on the spot, I'll try not to screw it up, Miguel. I got that message loud and clear. Lots of questions around the future of events. Part of the name of the session is the future. I'm going to try to narrow that conversation a bit and say, over the last 6 to 12 months, what are the things you've been hearing more frequently that's new and innovative? And then maybe we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about what you believe the future vision of events looks like over the course of the next few years. So we'll start with what you've been hearing more that feels innovative over the last 6 to 12 months. And I'll let you lead off, Miguel.
Yeah, I think I'd probably start with integrations. I think there's some really interesting integrations. I think more and more we're realizing that events are such a sort of horizontal that cuts across different sectors. You have these integrations with MarTech, you have integrations with all parts of the industry and kind of specializing. So I'm seeing, during the sort of COVID bubble, there was a lot of focus on improving the virtual platform. I feel like we got lost a little bit in that, and there was a lot of companies that focused all their energy there. But now I'm starting to see really interesting technology in kind of niche areas. And I'm quite excited about that, because it feels a little bit like pre-COVID, but hopefully we're a more mature sector now, and that sort of technology boost that we had over the COVID period, we can use that sort of extra power around it to kind of move those things faster. And I think integrations, I know it's not the sexiest topic, sorry, but integrations are super important, because I think a lot of tech stacks in the event industry started being developed much in a similar way to tech stacks in other industries, and that wasn't happening before. You had these big companies that sort of developed their technology in sort of a little bubble because they could, and now because of COVID they have to do it like every other kind of big technology company, and that's really good, because it means that development can happen much faster, and you can bring, Facebook laid off 11,000 people. Well, there's some really good engineers part of that 11,000 that might be able to do some really cool stuff in event tech, and hopefully there's some investment there that'll happen. So I'm really excited about that and how that all comes together. I think vision for the future, I think the bit that excites me most is how technology has the potential to impact in-person events. That real sort of seamless user experience where you're using technology and you don't even realize that you're using technology. That's my favorite thing in the world. When an app just works and you don't even think about it too much, you're just like, of course I'm using this. So yeah, it just works. That's really where I'd like to see event technology sort of get to. And I think in many situations it's still a little bit clunky, but we're getting there. I think we've realized that we can't develop apps that feel like Windows 95. We have to develop apps that feel like TikTok. And because I suck at TikTok, but I can figure it out, I can use it, I can scroll, I can swipe, all that kind of stuff. And when we develop event technology that behaves like that, it feels good to the users. And then people use it, surprisingly, and you don't get 30% adoption, you get 90% adoption, and then everybody's happy because you get more data. So yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, we refer to that kind of as a frictionless client experience. So that comes right from the point of the first communications around an event, making sure registration is as seamless as possible, be it online or in person. One of the most frustrating things we've had from customers is we're inviting them to events and then we're asking them to fill a registration form. We have them in our CRM. Why the hell are we asking them first name, last name, etc.? So it's really trying to again, using technology when you don't even realize you're benefiting from it. I think you've covered in person really well. On the virtual side, there's obviously fatigue out there, and it'll be interesting, given what you said about recession and maybe leaning more on virtual again, how that's going to manifest in terms of some of the fatigue that people have in reports that we see coming out. I think we're seeing 50% of people have mentioned around meeting fatigue, and I think the novelty of virtual events is lost now. People have a certain expectation around the presentation and the quality of events that we now produce virtually. So I think we are going to need to start upping the ante. I think content is still going to be absolutely key. Without great quality content, it doesn't matter how polished your virtual platform is. It all starts with the content. But I think we do need to also make sure that in order to avoid that fatigue kicking back in, is how can we make sure that these virtual events remain engaging? We've all done things like polling and Q&A and things like this, but how do we raise the bar on some of this stuff to the next level as well?
Can I just add a little note about that? I don't know if you'll agree, but I don't think it's not Zoom fatigue or virtual event fatigue. I think for me it's bad content delivery fatigue. When you see a person joining a virtual event that they're obviously using a laptop and it's on their knees and the sound is terrible and they're using their AirPods, but they're like, they're squeaky and you can't really hear very well and the camera's going up their nose, you're like, I don't want to watch this. This is not great. So I think when it's well-delivered content, short, let's keep it snappy. I don't think people are tired of that. I think they're tired because their expectation is down here, right? They're sort of like, yeah, it's going to be pretty bad. So I think you'll agree with me, but it's just like, I don't think it's the platform necessarily. It's how you deliver the content and the quality of it.
Well, I want to make sure we save enough time for questions. We have a number in the queue. Matt, I'm not sure if you're able to read those off to us. That'd be great. We can toss them back and forth between the three of us.
We have upvoting as well, which I love.
Yeah, it's got to be done. Guys, fascinating discussion as well. I've loved some of the comments. But okay, we've got some of the questions come through. So if you're on the app, it's glsr.live/ETL22 if you want to ask a question, or if you want to upvote some of them on there. So the first one, considering 2019 was the last normal year for events, I love that. How do we compare the growth and scale in the events industry in 2022?
Oh, that's a tough one. I can try to address that. I don't have hard data on the event tech side, but kind of anecdotal conversations that I've had is virtual event tech has actually grown, and the numbers I'm seeing are almost double what they were pre-2019. Maybe you can kind of confirm if that's true or not. So it's actually really exciting. The problem is we have this big bubble in between of like 10x, where going down to 2x is sort of like, that's not great. So it is actually great. It's just, it's hard to kind of keep those expectations. And a lot of people, staffed for 10x and now they have to downgrade that. So it's a bit not so exciting. In terms of in-person, the latest shows that I've seen are sort of at the 80-90% level that I mentioned before. So that's pretty good. We're not sure if that's pent-up demand, if that's just this year that things are back and then we'll actually settle at a sort of 60-70%. Because I think if we're at 60-70% of what 2019 was, unfortunately, that's not good for the event industry, the in-person event industry. So I can't really say, but those are the data that I have, and I'm really interested to see what 2023 looks like, to see where that settles.
Yeah, I would say within my world, which is obviously finance, I mentioned the importance of those client relationships. So we have doubled down, JP Morgan has doubled down on the in-person experience. I don't think that's necessarily true across the board. Some companies are still trying to work out where they land between the virtual and in-person experience. There's also some regional nuances as well. Certainly in APAC we haven't picked up anywhere near as for the likes that we have in the US and EMEA, but we're starting to gain confidence on that side. And as I mentioned before, virtual events still has a huge part to play. We have 20% more virtual events than we did in 2019 now, and that's born out of the benefits that we see, the experience that we've garnered from doing these things on a regular basis.
And I'll quickly add, we're in the midst of 2023 budget planning, and we have expectations that we'll see 20% year-over-year growth on the virtual side for us. And it's closer to that 2x versus the 10x if we're talking about comparison point from 2019. So going into 2023, we're expecting 20% growth on the virtual side. And we're expecting probably 30 to 35% growth on the in-person side, at least from financials for us as a company. But I think more specifically, we're seeing about 75% attendance, at least on our benchmarking. So it's very similar to what Miguel's saying.
And maybe further to your question to the audience about event planners and how many event planners and marketers in the room, but hands up if you're increasing your budget events that you're partaking in next year. Could we do a quick hands up if there's an increase? And staying about the same, maybe hands up as well? And spending a little bit less? No one's spending less. That's a good sign. Okay, so this next question, it comes up every year I'm on stage at Event Tech Live, but it's around business intelligence. So what BI tools are recommended for event analytics, and how is ROI best demonstrated when it could be nebulous or take some time to manifest in terms of sales and opportunities? Who would like to take that?
I don't think I can answer the tools part of that question. What I would say is I think unless you have the BI skills in-house, then I would strongly consider outsourcing that part of the puzzle, because it is a real skill, reading data, understanding what it means. And I see companies make massive assumptions when they look at data. And if you actually look at what the data says, you can read it in many different ways. So I think it really pays to have a team look at those that really knows what they're doing, rather than sort of, hey, we're going to buy this tool and this will just solve everything for us. You might actually be making some really costly mistakes by kind of selecting a tool.
Yeah, I don't want to mention any specific vendor, but I'm not sponsored by them. But I think it's important that you have, I think you're right, it's a specialism, business intelligence, and it's certainly for us, we have a dedicated team running that part of the platform and producing the dashboards to our marketeers and senior management. It's important that you do have a flexible platform. So we were talking about integration before. Events is just one of the integrations you need to have as an input to that. So it's important you have a platform that can have multiple feeds and is advanced enough to kind of produce the insights and the analytics that are going to really help your business.
Okay, I think the next question, I'm going to combine a couple of them. You guys mentioned about, yourself getting here, your wife's a little bit cross with you, mine's similar back home with 3 kids, but I'm here for a couple of days, hotel's lovely, I get a nice night's sleep. But the challenges of pulling people away, like previously it was kind of, can we get them out of the office for a day, or an afternoon, or a couple hours? But now you have got challenges to pull people away from their home. And it is quite hard. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced it, but to get out that front door, not in your PJ bottoms and slippers, but to put on some trousers and shoes or whatever to get to an event. So that's a challenge, but how can we use data to perhaps engage with attendees beforehand to attract them to come to the in-person event?
I think there's a couple of things around the signals you get from your engagements with them. So you want to be looking at, I think there's two pieces to this. One is that the insights that you pull out. So what are the sort of themes and interests that you've picked up from the signals, the digital signals that you've got for that client? It's also making sure you've got the ability for your clients to provide that feedback directly as well. So survey forms are boring, but there are ways to kind of gamify that and make it much more easy as a barrier to entry to get that information through.
Yeah. I think there's 2 ways, right? You ask people, surveys, and then you see what they actually do, or at least what they read, what they click on. And I think the latter is way more powerful, because I think people answer surveys in a certain way, but then if you actually see what they do, a lot of times it's quite different. So if your website, if your CRM platform, if your event platform are all integrated, you can detect things in the marketing. You can say, basic example, you send an email out with a couple of different topics, and you can see which one people click on. You can see which speakers people are most interested in, and you can make changes in real time if you've allowed yourself to do that to really make the best of having that information. So I'm actually a huge fan of kind of integrated marketing campaigns where you plan for it. You kind of say, hey, we're going to send all this stuff out, and then we're going to kind of like figure out what are people actually interested in, or what they seem most interested in, and then double down, invest in that, rather than sort of like set the budget, get everything, hire all the speakers, and then it's like, oh, we're stuck with these guys. We don't actually know if they're going to be a success or not.
And it's using those analytics to personalize the content that you're pushing out. That's the key piece here. And it takes a while to get to that, to have the right sophistication within your platform, but I think that's ultimately where you need to get to. You want to have that personalized message, the personalized relevant information that you're providing to that particular client.
That's the next level. That personalization is, that's where everybody wants to get to.
And I think the thing I would add is that if you want to get there, you have to start now, and there's a lot of small incremental steps you have to take. You've got Reese telling you that we've been on a data journey for the last 4 years. I'm not saying that has to happen for everyone from a time frame perspective, but it is a place where you have to start thinking about. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but there are great incremental changes that you can make over time if you make it something that's intentional as part of your strategy.
And I think if you've got that history of data from your events, it's kind of like, pre-pandemic, you had the intent of why someone's coming, so the registration form, that would say actually how many people just ticked the first box because they wanted to get through that form really quickly. That data was probably wholly inaccurate on most events, potentially. Whereas actually once they get to the event, who they've met, what sessions they've attended, what exhibitors they've interacted, that paints that picture better of what that audience is there for, and to your point, you can market a little bit better to them to attract them in future years, for example, right?
Yeah, and I know you're going to the next question, but I'm pretty passionate about this. I'm a data nerd, so I'll be quick because I know this is boring, but I think there are a lot of proven platforms that engage people very naturally, that do predictive things, that make recommendations and have recommendation engines. I watch Netflix. There's things I watch on Netflix that I have no idea why I'm watching them, except that they were recommended to me and I chose them and actually enjoyed them. And so there are a lot of tools out there and that technology services well that we don't necessarily think about through the lens of events, that are models for us to think about how we can leverage to not only engage our attendees, but to engage our employees, et cetera. So food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next one. Do you see event tech playing a role to optimize and advance the networking experience for attendees at in-person events?
Yeah, the answer is yes, obviously. The challenge for me is, well, there's many challenges, but the challenge is going back to that UX thing. When you, like I'm here, I know, I don't know, a couple thousand people might come here throughout the next couple of days. I'd love to have a really good way of kind of figuring out who's here, connecting. If I was able to do that through LinkedIn, I think that would be ideal. If I could kind of scroll through LinkedIn and just have this like, oh, these 100 people that I know are going to be there. And people post and do that kind of stuff, but there's no way of doing that really effectively. There are there's platforms that do that really well. I haven't had the experience of using one that just sort of is easy. I think Tinder is probably the sort of, the classic example of, I met my wife before Tinder, so that was cool. I know a lot of people, date through Tinder, which is great. That just works. If I had Tinder for this show and could have just like swiped people that I know, people I want to meet, that works. Most platforms don't work like that, and I think when they do, it's really going to boost, but not quite there yet. I think we still need to kind of nudge people and get that UX better and kind of get people. And a lot of people also don't want to tick that they're coming. So, like Reese, if you announced to everybody that you were coming to the show and made a big sign, I would guess you'd have a line outside the door, people wanting to meet you every moment that you're here. So you probably don't want to announce that too loud, right? So there's a little bit of a social element to that. It's not just technology.
And we've got security for Reese in a car waiting at the back, so he's going to make a quick exit afterwards. I'm kidding. Reese, did you have a point on that as well?
No. Well, first of all, I don't think Tinder have a booth here today, but that would be really interesting if they did. And you seem to know a lot about Tinder for a married man. Sorry. I'm seeing this. I think I'm seeing the same picture for us at JP Morgan. Is that we've run some high-profile events. We really haven't switched on that feature yet. It is there is a bit of a, maybe this is a banking thing. There is a kind of a friction point to people to want to provide that information and have that engagement. I think for us, when we're running events, when we look at the intent of an event, there's really three main things. There's it's about providing an exclusive experience. It's about the networking aspect, and it's about the content. And the networking aspect and the sorry, going back to the networking access, it's really, really hard to do virtually. And so that's why we really have focused more so on bringing that back in person.
And part of the part of your service is that that personal touch, right? So I think this is a classic case of just because you can doesn't mean you should, and you've chosen not to because that's part of what you do.
So I was in an interesting discussion last night. You just talked about the personalization, but then also the technology that helps facilitate a lot of this. We, as an event technology industry here today, are telling people to come to events for this in person. We all want to hear, we want to chat, we want to network, we want to learn. But it's a bot telling you to come and learn. So have we lost out on some of, I say bot, email, etc. Have we lost something there, that we've lost the personality because we're relying so much on technology to drive in-person connections where you all need to meet with each other? Is there something lost in that technology kind of circle?
Yeah, I think, email marketing is not the solution to everything, or bots or anything like that. And I think, especially and you might have some experience with this, but I think some of the smaller, more personal events, I think a personal invitation, a written thing in the mail, may have a much bigger impact, and a personal phone call like, I'd really like to see you, there's this event we're doing, etc. That may be way more effective than building a website, doing all sorts of campaigns, etc. And that may be the right solution for those type of events.
I think you're right for some of those small events, and it doesn't negate the use of technology. So the platforms are sophisticated enough that we, for example, on our private bank business, we will have emails coming out of our marketing automation platform that look like they've come from an advisor. The advisor has an opportunity to write a personalized note.
Careful with those.
Yeah, indeed. But they have the opportunity to personalize that content while still using the automation and the standard templates and things like that come with an event and marketing automation platform.
Sorry, I don't mean to be flippant, but it's just I have this pet peeve where I get emails from a company and then it has the CEO's name, and then I sort of create a rule in Gmail that says, hey, if I get an email from this email, it goes into this folder and it skips my inbox. And then that person tries to email me personally and I don't see the emails. So it's one of those marketing tricks that I think really backfires, and I really encourage people not to do that, because it's a cheap trick to get the first email open or the second email open, and then it kills your email marketing, in my opinion.
I think that's really good advice. Right, I think we've got time for one more question, and I like this one because there's a discussion on this later today, but there's a real challenge about the future of our industry and the workforce that comes into it, and how do we attract bright, new, young talent. So I'm assuming this is from a student, but any advice for a student on where to start to be effective at event organization today? I mean, events like this, right? This is a start where you get to learn what's going on, you get to learn the trends. Like, this discussion's been incredible, but yeah.
I could talk about this for hours, so I'll try to be very, very quick.
You've got 30 seconds.
I'll try to do 60 seconds. Look, I think that the obvious things is, if you're a student, understanding how the industry works is super important. This is a village. It's small. Everybody knows each other, so the more you kind of understand how it works, better. Showing a great attitude, showing up, that kind of advice to students, it's always super important. You can't really train attitude, so that's really great. But I think my kind of biggest piece of advice is to just kind of think big and kind of build your tribe, in a sense. And I know I shouldn't really be using the word tribe, but build your network, and build your network around what you'd like to see yourself doing in the future. And I always advise students, don't ask me for a job. Tell me what your dream is, and ask me for help in getting there. And part of that request is if I hear of a job that I think might lead you to that dream role, I'll think of you. But if you ask me for a job, my answer is 99% chance of being no, and that's the end of that conversation. And that just kills that thing. If you talk to me about what you'd really like to do, then I paint a picture of who you are, and that helps me help you.
Really good advice. Of whichever student that was in the room, you know what to ask next. Reese, have you got a comment on that?
I mean, I'd come back from my technology angle. I think it's important to understand the domain we're in. It's important to understand where technology can be used to advance your events. It's important to also understand when is the right time to be looking at in-person versus virtual experiences. So, we're at Event Tech Live, right? I would encourage you to understand the domain, understand the opportunities of how you can be using technology to advance your events.
And Chad, final comment.
And my final point is, I think hold on to the expectations that you have for technology. I think there can be some challenges inside of this industry at time with tech laggard and other things that make our user experiences not what they should be. I think we're going through a transformation for many reasons. Some of that is because we have been a tech laggard. And so if you're new to this industry, carry the same expectations that you have for other user experiences and technology into this industry, and I think you'll be an agent of change.
That's really great advice. Thank you, guys. Well, can we put our hands together, please, for Miguel, Reese, and Chad?